Hello and welcome. My name is Trismegistus, and today we're going to be reading through and flipping out over the latest Factorio Friday Facts. Friday Facts 442. Flip, flow and fresh paint. Posted by Clonan, V and Rhaegar. Hello, it's Friday again. So I guess to note just before we get started is that I'm probably going to be talking about each of the bits as we go rather than sort of dumping it all at the end. Flipping more things. By Clonan. After we introduced the concept of flipping back in 1.1, talked about in Friday Facts 364, it became more and more annoying to have certain entities prevent flipping. While some things will always be impossible, train stops, rail signals, etc., we do what we can. If you don't know, so train stops and rail signals, they can't be flipped in the game. The reason being that trains always need the train stop to be on the left-hand side. So if you flip it over, then, say for example, you've got a train rail line going up and the rail stop is on the left hand side, so that it's, the train going up and it's going to stop there. If you were flipping it, so you do a horizontal flip, then suddenly that train stop is on the right, which would look visually weird because it would actually kind of rotate in order to maintain the left side, or it suddenly becomes a right hand train stop, which is not allowed in the game. So that's why they're blocked. Train signals I've never quite fully understood. I could see why you would let them flip, but I think basically it's because if it is a train going upwards and you flip it over, the signal would have to be on the left for the train to obey it. If you flip it over, then suddenly it becomes a you're not flipping it, you're rotating it, if you see what I mean, because suddenly if the signal flips to the right hand side, then it's trains going down that piece of rail that would obey that rule. So if you were building with a set of blueprints, you flip them over just for one bit, then suddenly your rail system might not work because all of your trains trying to go up are suddenly getting signals that only work if they go down, if that makes sense. Pumpjack. The Pumpjack was always a touch strange with the rotations. Maybe it was adding to the puzzle, but these days we are more of the opinion it is just making things more awkward. Now it will be a little easier, or at least somewhat less frustrating, to get your Pumpjacks and pipes all connected just how you like. Okay, so even though this is under a section about flipping, what they've actually done with the Pumpjack is made it so that it rotates as well, and you can kind of see that in that they've shown all of the possible orientations in this picture. It doesn't now do that weird thing, because previously the Pumpjack, it was like on the outputs were always on a diagonal. If you rotated it, the one that was at the top, so it was effectively on the left hand side machine of output of the machine. When you rotated it so that it was facing down, it wouldn't be on the left-hand side anymore. It would flip over to the right-hand side. So effectively you had this diagonal pipe in the middle of it, which had sort of outputs there and there and there and there. And so when you rotated it, it didn't rotate in a sensible way. But essentially now what they're doing is it has all possible output orientations, and it'll flip and rotate as a normal building would. Burner miner. We also added it to the burner miner, so you can make your early burner empire more optimized than ever. It's basically, as you'd expect, and the same again, it rotates round and flips now basically. So this one did rotate round properly, so as you went at top right and did a flip, it would flip to there, and it would rotate to there because you only had rotation with it, and it would rotate to there and it would rotate to there. So it always stayed on the same side of the building. Now it's just a case of if you flip it, so this one here is a flipping of that, where if you were rotating it, it would end up on that side of it. Drop lane indication on perpendicular belts. If you paid close enough attention, you might also notice that the drop arrows shift subtly to the side, so that you know which side of the belt the machine will drop to. Okay, and what it's referring to there is, if you can see, this is actually quite a good example of it, because the arrow for a belt that's going out parallel to the direction of output, it will indicate which side of the belt it will put the item on. Now that's important because it was always a bit esoteric. It was a bit sort of, if you only knew once you knew, as it were, in that the arrow was just floating about covering the whole thing, and so which side of the belt it was going to put on, you didn't really know until you tried it. And obviously eventually, you learnt what all the orientations were or experimented with it. It was just part of the game in a sense. Now it actually shows you, I'm going to put the items on the left-hand side of the belt. I'm going to put the items on the right-hand side of the belt. One of the things with that, and what they're also hinting at, and it will sort of say it later on, is that you can flip them over. So where you are outputting here to the right side of the belt, notice on this one, you're outputting to the left side of the belt. And here, the left side of the belt, the right side of the belt, left side of the belt, right side of the belt. So you now have the possibility of outputting on different sides of the belt from different machines. However, with perpendicular belts, you can't select it. You can't reach over to the other side of the belt. But it is now showing, the arrow is located in such a way that it's clear, I think, that it's now going on the side of the belt that the machine is outputting to. But what you can do is you can say, if you want this feature of outputting on one side of the belt from a machine that outputs directly onto a belt, then you have to run a parallel belt coming out of it, and then you can select it. I think they mean parallel rather than perpendicular. So this is showing it, closer up and in more detail, in that both of these miners are outputting to a perpendicular belt, so a belt that is perpendicular to the direction of output, and it just stops. There is no putting it on the other side. It's clear that it's on the same side of the belt as the machine, whereas these two, where it's got the output parallel. Because they've used that, I've got confused. But parallel to the direction of output, you can select which side you want to put it in. And then it says it applies to all entities which have a drop arrow mechanic. What it then shows, we've talked about it as, pump jacks, as it were, and which is sort of the same thing, but obviously pumps and pipes don't have sides, but belts do. So the burner mining drills can do it because they are output directly on a belt. Electric mining drills can do the same, as well as recyclers. They can do the same. So any machine that outputs directly onto a belt, and you can think of certainly one more example in Space Age, which is the big mining drill. If it outputs directly on a belt, you can do this trick, essentially. Now, it actually ties in really well, in my opinion, with something that we're going to talk about later, but just for now, let's keep going. Just knowing which side of the belt a machine will drop on is nice, but we also don't want to have any build inconsistencies when you flip an entity or blueprint. So using the flip hotkey, it is possible to adjust which side of the belt a machine will drop to. So that's what I've literally just been explaining. They put down these parallel belts to the inserters, and of course inserters are kind of included, but sort of more on that in a second. And you notice here they go through basically, and when it does it by default, it shows you it's the right hand belt. So that's the default setting. And then they come in with the H key to flip them all over to the other side of the belt. And then they do that. And this is really what it's allowing you to do. Two inserters from either side can now basically fill the opposite lanes. So the whole thing of side loading it when it's coming out, you can sort of avoid that, but the output belts have to be parallel. It is slightly restricted, you see. It's not full on. I always forget whether it's in Bob's or Angel's, but the one that allows you to set exactly where you put it on the belt, it's not quite that far, but it does allow you for parallel belts for the direction of output to flip it over. And it's really nice, actually. It's a really nice little quality of life thing. And this works implicitly when you flip a blueprint. So setup you copy and place down flipped should work just the same. They then obviously demonstrate that here. What the thing to look out for is this third inserter. Okay, so they're all outputting to the far side of the belt as per normal, as is that one. This one, because it's a parallel belt, it's saying, right, I'm putting it on the right hand side. So if you imagine this as a train unloading thing, maybe you've got a train station here and a train station here, and you just want to copy it over. So you want all your iron ore from these two trains to go out on the same output. So you just copy and paste, but you flip it over. And what you would expect to happen and this is kind of why they've done it, is that this stays the same. Here we have two belts outputting onto the left-hand side, and two belts outputting onto the right-hand side, because this is set up to output on the right-hand side. So you're getting an even number of outputs onto both sides of the belt. But when you would flip it before, okay, it wouldn't be the same. So this, what's actually goes on with the inserters, it used to be, is it would always output on the right-hand side of the belt when it was out parallel. So it would always put it on that right-hand side. So if you flipped it over, it was actually like rotating it twice, and so it would move to the right. So this flipped version, I'm actually I've got it, I can pause it to stop it, running through basically. So say I've sort of zoomed this in. So you see now when it's the flipped version, it's putting it on the left-hand side of the belt. So you're maintaining that two inputs going onto one side and two inputs going onto the other side. Okay, so that's kind of the big reason they've done it. It makes flipping more consistent, basically. That's like one of the core reasons for doing it, because say if you flip this before, that would actually output on the right hand side, and suddenly you would go to 1 on one and 3 on the other, and you would need a completely different inserter, a completely different configuration where it was that one that had the sideways, and so then you would got the 2 on the right, which would be these two, and 2 on the left, which would be these two. So you needed a completely different design to simply flip it over, and that's the type of thing they're wanting to get rid of. Adjusting the drop lane of inserters also opens up more opportunities. And the caption just says, lane flipping is a pathway to many abilities some consider to be unnatural. And here they show them using it and say this is one of the brilliant things that it's now lets you do, is that some of this stuff before you would have to have arrangements of belts and side loading yourself and all this sort of stuff, and instead you can just go, right, I want all of my outputs to be on one side of the belt, or I want both of them to go on, half to go on one and half to go on the other, or all of those sorts of things. So in particular, this is one of the big improvements in that these inserters are now going to output in such a way, and there is another, I was wondering if I would have to tease what was going on with this, but they do explain it. But basically, these inserters will now output in such a way that 2 are on output on one side and 2 output on the other, without you having to do lane balancing or side loading or anything like that. And so you've got 4 outputs here that go nicely down into 2, and obviously you could just take belt out of 1. There was some idea that the ambiguity of the drop was adding to the puzzle. You'd need to design builds to not rely on it. But we think the new builds and player expression the lane flipping allows outweighs this. So basically, counter-argument was that by having this, it meant that it was a more complicated puzzle. I can sort of see that argument, but for me, it just comes down to weird quirks that you have to work around, which is not a puzzle. It's not a puzzle that you can't just set it up in a sensible way. The puzzle element to this, to me, is your flow throughput of trains, of unloading evenly, balancing things. Those are sort of the real puzzle. The logistics is the puzzle. The fact that you have to happen to know that a flipped inserter will actually output on what is the other side of the belt and it won't unload evenly is just a knowledge thing, and it's a quirk. It's not that makes it any more interesting or difficult. It's just you used to have 2 versions. Well, it's not a puzzle. Or if it is, it's a bit of a naff puzzle. So I say, to me, it's more just making it consistent and how you would expect it to work. It then shows here, so this is like and more on asteroids and asteroid crashing later, but we've got basically a whole load of inserters, sushi style belt for asteroids, putting into machines, and obviously the output's going back onto that belt there, and once crushed, they're outputting here and they're all filtered and what have you. So the way they're setting this up is they're creating like mixed belts only using the inserters without having to do any kind of side loading or anything like that. They are using a side loading trick here in order to get calcite plus iron ore and calcite plus water. But fundamentally, they're creating these single lane belts, mixed single lane belts. So in other words, everything on one side is one thing and everything on the other is the other, using inserters, and that's it. They don't have to bother with side loading or any of that stuff. A semi-related change related in the way of drop consistency is that inserters will now always drop to the input side of splitters. The point being that this type of arrangement, like I said, wouldn't work before, because these would go on the outside of the splitters. And so the ones coming out here would get stuck. So what you'd have to do is put a separate line of belt, pushing it all down by one, and then it goes into the splitters and works. Because and I say they're not changing that it can put it on the front side or near side. It's more left or right when it's in the same direction, if you see what I mean. And so these would then say, put it on the outside, and so the items would just get stuck there. New graphics. By V. With the rush before the release of 2.0 and Space Age, we naturally had to omit some projects, but very soon after the release of 2.0, we started working on these so that they could be included someday. Some of this stuff is really nice. There's also mechanical stuff in here. It's not just prettier things, but we'll get onto those in a sec. Diagonal flamethrower turret. Continuing on from the flippable entities, it has always felt clunky to combine flamethrower turret arcs so they would complement each other, especially on wall corners. Since we already have a diagonal turret in the railgun, we found it very natural to make the flamethrower turret match that. So, yes, if you can't tell, and you should be able to tell, if you can't tell, this one, and this one are now at diagonals. So before, if you never used flamethrower turrets, I'm not entirely sure anyone's not used them, but before you were only allowed to do them vertically and horizontally. There was no diagonal flamethrower turret. Now, to be fair, the arc of a flamethrower is such that they overlapped automatically. There was no... So if it was a narrow fan, then on a corner you would end up with a gap, but it isn't. It's like, I think it's more than 120 degrees. I can't remember the number, but it's like 160 degrees or something. So it's not quite 180. It's not quite fully right the way around. It is an arc, but it's an arc that if you've got them close enough sort of thing, then they do overlap and you don't get gaps at corners. So if you put them relatively close, then you'll get over-crossing coverage. Of course, that meant you had to have them close and stuff, so, I guess there is that tweak to it. But now if you put it on the corner, it has a corner arc on the edge, and so you don't need to even think about it really. Obviously, you do still need to have them close enough, that you've not got gaps, otherwise there will be bits that the biters can get through. But that's, it's a fairly big distance, and depending on what sort of depth you want to deal, you just have them, say, 6 tyres apart, and there's loads and loads of overlap, and your corners are covered nicely as well. So yeah, visually it's also, I think, nice, because it does look really good, and when it's not quite so sort of clear because they not put pipes on them, but the pipes do connect really nicely to them. They don't look janky or weird in any way, and it is like corner connections. You can see it, so that is a connection and that is a connection. So it's not, when it's diagonal, I mean, it wouldn't work, but so if the diagonal flamer turret corners, the pipe connections aren't at diagonals, they are sort of rotated so that it's a flat, and it meshes up nicely with the pipe. It's not, doesn't get some weird gap, or it doesn't not make sense, as it were. So they do look nice and visually integrated. Obviously, before the head, the actual flamer itself has always been able to go through every direction because of you could do the 4 north, south, east, west, and so it's just sat on a thing that's rotating, and it's the actual bit on the bottom really that's changing direction. But yeah, it's really nice in game, this. Since we already had the main parts of the 3D model, the biggest challenges Zloty had to face were around positioning all of the models so that the pipes fit nicely, and it occupies the diagonal collision box well which is always easier said than done. So yeah, so what it does also show you is it nicely shows you where the collision box is, so where the edges are, and you can really, the corner feet are perfectly positioned to like show you this is the collision box, this is where the entity is, rather than, if that was too far in, it wouldn't show it properly. So it does also look nicely rotated. I don't know if they might have tweaked that as well to make it match better, but it does look like it's a rotated version of the turret. It doesn't look like a completely different model sort of thing. So yes, it is very nice in game. And one thing to mention there, I'm just sort of assuming people know, but they actually build all of the things in, I think, just Blender. It's as a 3D model, and they do the sprites as like effectively like what you might call screen captures. That they're not, but it's that type of thing where it's basically this is, rotate it around to this angle, take a picture of it, and then they go into Photoshop and like touch it up and make it look even nicer. So they do have proper 3D models of. I don't know about everything, but I would suspect everything. But certainly most of the things they've got 3D models of. So doing new versions of them means they've got a starting point, even if it is still a lot of work to get it to work. Planet improvements. A lot of work went into creating the graphics for all of the things you get to see on the planet. And while we were quite satisfied with the state on release, there are a few things we couldn't prevent ourselves from doing. Fulgora ruins. It's always been planned that the oily ocean wouldn't be completely empty, but instead there would be more ruins sticking out of it. The now dead civilization was at one point all over the planet, and these sunken ruins poking out of the oil could suggest that the islands of Scrap are just a tip of the iceberg we're seeing, with much more hidden deep under the thick, oily sea. I say they are lovely. One of the things I would note on it, I don't think this is a spoiler, but to try and look at them in game, I loaded up an old version of one of my saves. It didn't spawn them in the already revealed bits of the map. I did go for a little walk, but it was a bit of a pain in the backside because that old save is knackered because as soon as I load it up, I get a billion alerts about Gleba being destroyed because they did several changes to how the pentapods work. And so it just drives me nuts with it bleeping out constantly. So I can't really open it up. It just drives me insane. It didn't seem to spawn them on the existing oil. But yes, so if you have an old save and you're doing it, certainly in the bit that you've already revealed, it doesn't spawn them currently. They might add that. They've done fixes like that before. But whether it will spawn them far out, I don't know because I was driven insane and I didn't go very far to look, so maybe they're out in the dim distances and you'll be able to see them. But you might have to start a new game. Is the point? I mean, I think I'm at the point where I think start a new game anyway. There's quite a lot of stuff coming, as you've just seen in this one and the previous one, where I think just start a new save. Gleba stromatolites. As we've shown in one of the past Friday Facts, 431, Gleba received some significant last-minute changes, and one of the added things were stromatolites, rock-like formations of bacteria from which you can harvest iron and copper. We didn't have much time to focus on their graphics because Fergal had his hands full with finishing Aquilo, so the stromatolites ended up being just paint-overs of existing rocks. We've got the return of my favourite, the swipey diagram. The caption on it says, "Thankfully, you can't smell them through the rest of Gleba." I guess first just to note, stromatolites are a real thing. This isn't something they've completely made up for the game. Unfortunately, I thought Britannica might be not as bad, but it's got a billion adverts on it. So living stromatolites in Hamelin Pool of Shark Bay, Western Australia. So these are live ones. But yes, so this is a thing. You get them, they're like fossilised and you can see them in the fossil record and all that sort of stuff. So they've been there, billions of years. These are real stromatolites. It's a real thing. They've not just made them up for the game. This is the old version, so what it looks like currently in game, and as it says in the text there, and as you can really tell, they've just taken rocks, their standard rock graphic, and kind of just painted over them. Just sort of what it mostly appears to be is like flattening, smoothing them out. So it was, just sort of where it was a bit knobbly and crackly, it's now a smoother surface, and that was it. Just leave it at that. And what they've done is they've made them much more knobbly, basically. So looking at those the graphics, those pictures we saw, they are much more like that in real life. They're much more knobbly and craggly and that sort of thing, but they don't have sharp, pointy edges. So that's what they've tried to capture. So again, if you look at these, it's sort of knobbly and craggly and bits on them and stuff like that, rather than it's not spiky, sharp rocks, and that's kind of what they've tried to capture. With the release done, Fulgor had some time to improve them and make them more visible in the environment. We didn't want to alter the look too much, so the new design is basically the same, but now they integrate with the environment better and form nice clumps. Yeah, so as you can see, each one is, there's nothing to do with like changing the spawning, as it were. You've got, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 there. And you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 there, whatever that is. Is that 2? Is it 3 of them? Yeah, so one of the things it does do is make them look better integrated when they're close to each other. Before they were very clearly, blob, 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 blob. Whereas now they tend to overlap a bit more visually, and it looks like an area of stromatolite rather than separate blob rocks, basically. But yeah, they're much more detailed, much nicer shapes and pictures, basically. So that will change over. I did have a look on Gleba. It had the new stromatolite graphics on it because it's just swapping a file. Vulcanus rocks. Vulcanus was the first planet we worked on graphically, and at the time we were satisfied enough that the recoloured Nauvis rocks never became a priority before Space Age release. The caption says, "You may notice that in the hotter areas the rocks are not fully cooled yet." This is the current, and they are literally just the Nauvis rocks that have been recoloured. If you go to, when you're on Nauvis, this is exactly the same rock type that you will see. These are just sort of darker versions of them. It was fine. What it meant is that when you went there, you knew exactly what you were looking for when you're mining them up, because it was exactly the same graphic. But to be fair, it didn't make sense in the sense that they're meant to be lava rocks, and it doesn't fit visually with the cliff edges, which are meant to be parts of a volcano, and the whatever they call the fumarole things and all that sort of stuff. So what they've done is they have changed them, basically, as you'd expect. And they're now much more sort of sharp and pointy in particular. Unlike the stromatolites, where they've gone knobbly but smooth, here they've gone sharp and pointy. And they do fit much, much better into the environment. It does make them, if I'm honest, a little difficult to see, in the sense that this, could be part of the land. But then, to be fair, you get a little bit of that effect in Factorio as well, in that there's some terrain colours where it can be a little difficult to differentiate between rocks. And there are decoratives, aren't they, that are a bit rock-like. So sometimes you can think something's a rock and it's actually a decorative. So you get the same thing here. I'm not saying that like a complaint. It's just that it does look a bit sort of like, is that a rock or is that part of the terrain? And all you really need to do if you're ever encountering that is get a deconstruction planner and drag it across, and it will just show you which are rocks and which are decoratives, basically. What it means by the colour thing is, if you look in this here, these have got like a red glow, like they're freshly formed from the lava, whereas these are not. So they haven't got that red sort of underglow, indicative that they've been produced a little while ago and they've cooled down a bit. So what we can tell with that is that there must be another lava flow up here, because this one is bright and glowing. And that's sort of the implication that Vulcanus is this churning tectonic plates, always moving, always changing. And so you're going to get some new rocks that have formed recently. It also ties them in, interestingly, to the Demolishers, but more on them in a second, in that they have a sort of a glowy under surface as well, which might be an interesting avenue, going back to my whole speculation thing, of what Demolishers are all about. So, yeah. Fulgor couldn't let them remain simple recolours forever, especially since they look so much softer than all the other Vulcanus stones. So he made some new, more aggressive versions based on the volcanic tephra and AA lava flows. At this point, Fulgor has made so many rocks that this was a walk in the park. AA quality work. Quality work. Apparently this is, so this, I think a lot of this is based on like Hawaii, because obviously Hawaii is very volcanically active. You know, it is basically like an active volcano, the whole set of island chains. I hadn't known that term, so I looked it up, and basically there are two sort of classifications of lava. There's the ones where it looks like fluid, as it were, and it looks like a liquid that's kind of set. To me, it often looks like an oil flow, you know, one of those thick oil flows that you get in a spill, and it's sort of like smooth in a sense, and that's called pahoho. And so I think these are, Hawaiian terms basically, but that's like, the sort of softer lava. But this AA, however it's pronounced, is the spiky stuff. So when you see the other flows where it's more like sort of Greenland or something like that, maybe that's where that's come from. Maybe the pahoho is because you get the softer flow on Hawaii, and is like maybe a Norwegian term or something like that, where Greenland, it's all, because that's all spiky, jagged rocks on Greenland. So maybe that's where the two names come from. I don't know. I haven't really read this. But yes, those are the two basic types. What they're caused by is what's in the actual lava. You get a lot of like dissolved gases in lava, which we'll come on to later. But that then affects like the viscosity and like what they're made of, what the actual lava consists of, and you get like different flow rates basically, because some lava flows are so slow that you can literally walk slowly ahead of them, but other lava flows are really, really fast. You get very rapid flow, down the mountain and what have you. So, or down the volcano. So that there's also that's my limited memory of geography basically, and geology. And so basically, I say you get these different types of flows, and what they've gone with, and because it's the actual terrain, as it were, tends to be a bit more spiky. This is a bit more lumpy and a bit more spiky bits. That's what they've tended to go for here with the actual lava flows. So the actual the mineable rocks. But yeah, so the rocks. I've said a hell of a lot about some rocks, haven't I? But basically you have now exclusive rocks for Vulcanus, where it was just now this one's recoloured before. We knew that there were some issues with the design of the Demolisher. A lot of the flow lines we included on the surface didn't really make sense and didn't help sell the volume as much as we had hoped. However, it was a behemoth undertaking, and so we couldn't afford to spend the time reworking them before release. This then is the new one, basically. So this is what it now looks like. We're going to get a comparison thing to look at pictures of this, but this is what it now looks like. And so Fulgora took to making a new version. After some experiments with different surfaces, we landed on one which retains the volume and has some extra stony plating. The new Demolishers should feel much better integrated into their environment, and their shapes should generally feel more sensible. So this is the current one, okay? And looking at this now, I'm wondering if it's these stripes that are the flow lines. Maybe that's what they're referring to. Caption on this just says, as if you needed more reason to fear them. We also always wanted to have proper corpses for the Demolishers, but having directional entities with directional corpses would be technically difficult and expensive on VRAM, so we stuck with the placeholder rocks. With the rocks changing, these also had to go, which left Fulgora the difficult task of creating direction-agnostic corpse sprites. He settled on this part-exploded shell rock, which shows us some of the pumice-like internals of the beasts, for all of you who keep them around as memorials of conquered lands from neighbours. So yeah, this is a massive improvement. So what they did before is they just turned them into, you remember these are the recoloured rocks from Nauvis? They just turned them into those. So you would kill one, and then it would just turn it into those things. It would do a big animation, of bits flying off, and that was always great. But then it would just be a bunch of rocks in the line, basically, and you would mine them up. Now they do actually look different to the sharp and pointy rocks. So we had the sharp and pointy rocks as the new proper Vulcanus rocks, and now these look more soft, as it were. And the reason for that is they're made of pumice. The caption just says a fitting end to a worthy foe, but these look more like pumice. So you don't know pumice. I mean, I mean, who doesn't know pumice? But it's basically a type of volcanic rock, and it's very, very light because it's full of holes. What that comes from, I mentioned before, lava has a lot of absorbed gases into it, and when those are particularly high, then you get this. It sort of expands but instantly freezes, essentially. So the gas, when it comes out of the volcano, the gases expand, but then the whole surface is freezing very quickly, and so it traps those pockets basically, and so you get this bubbly texture to the stone, and so it's because of the amount of gas dissolved in the rock. Biclonan. Quality has been a divisive part of the Space Age experience. Some players love it, and some don't. Nonetheless, we do our best to make the features and gameplay of quality as good as possible, so we have some upcoming changes to present. I'm assuming most of you, when you watch these videos, you've already read them. If you're not, then I'll try not to quite spoil it. Obviously, it's coming up very soon, but this is a bit of a double-edged sword in that they're adding something that might encourage you to do quality, but they're changing something that a lot of people use to make quality easier. So let's get into it. I said the YouTuber thing. Space Age without quality. In 2.0, quality is a hard dependency on Space Age, which means you have to enable quality to play Space Age. This was somewhat intentional. When designing 2.0 and filling out the balancing, we knew some things would be tougher if you didn't have quality items, such as space platform design. Having a few high quality solar panels, accumulators or such, made a big impact on the effectiveness of platforms. This was always kind of my comment on quality. I've never really bothered with it beyond platforms. But to me, quality and platforms were hand in hand, because being able to have far fewer solar panels and accumulators on a platform was really nice. But also, you got more grabber arms on the asteroid collector, and crushers were way better as they went up in quality. Gun turrets get extra range for taking on asteroids, and all of these changes felt like they were really extra range for defensive walls on Alvis. Okay, great, wonderful. But extra range on a platform that's barreling along, about to crash into a load of dangerous asteroids, that's super useful. And it always felt like quality and space platforms went hand in hand. That was what they were designed for, really. So to me, that's where I used them. That's where I used quality and other things, personal equipment, great, little boosts and stuff. But going and making quality pipes and all that sort of stuff, it just, why bother, sort of thing. The point is, that's why they forced it on you, because the benefits you got and having it on platforms was so nice. And you have to remember, when they're balancing a game, they're not the super users, the people who've played thousands of hours already and just can work out systems and optimize the game. They're not your core audience. Your core audience is your normal player who's going to do a couple of playthroughs maybe. And so giving them, here's a grabber that you can put on your front of your ship and it grabs 5 times as many items, that's something worth them getting. The other main sticking point was that you need the recycler from quality on Fulgora. So not having the quality mod enabled means you couldn't progress on Fulgora. You could choose not to use quality. You could choose not to do quality when you played through. You still had to turn it on because you need the recycler for Fulgora. I'm sure there's some mad person who's made Fulgora work without recyclers, but you need it on Fulgora to make Fulgora work. And the two at the moment are inextricably linked. You have to turn quality on in order to get the recycler, because you can just do quality. You can do quality without Space Age. You can't do Space Age without quality. But due to various reasons, a large one being mod compatibility, we've decided to make it possible to play Space Age without quality, with the primary change being splitting the recycler to its own separate mod. So yes, basically you now have the ability to turn on the recycler as a separate thing. Okay, so what that means is you can play without the rest of quality, because you can turn just the recycler on and then you can therefore play on Fulgora without needing to bother with quality, but you can still make Fulgora work. However, we still believe it's best that players who play Space Age have quality enabled, so we added a new type of mod dependency, recommended. Quality is enabled by default, but it is possible to turn it off and play without quality. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure lots of people will turn it off and, what have you, they hate it, except you're going to get something that's going to encourage you to use it. Space Casino. There is a confluence of mechanics present in Space Age which leads to a strategy with an outsized benefit for crafting higher quality items. Firstly, asteroid reprocessing recipes return asteroid chunks. Secondly, the research for increasing the reprocessing yield. And thirdly, being able to put quality modules in the reprocessing recipes. Together, they mean that once you have everything in place, you can essentially reprocess asteroid chunks all the way up to legendary quality, and from there produce legendary raw materials. And we are very sorry, but it is too strong to leave it alone. We don't want to be fun killers, but it just makes any other approach to quality obsolete. So, in 2.1, placing quality modules in the asteroid reprocessing recipes is disallowed. There are other recipes we were considering tweaking, such as low-density structures in foundries or such, but we are leaving those alone. Right, so what they've done is they've nerfed space casinos, but you can still sort of do some of the things for space casinos. The change is for the reprocessing recipe. You cannot put quality modules in it, but that's it. You can still put quality modules in the actual asteroid like the normal crushing recipe. So when you get the asteroid chunks and you crush them initially, quality modules can go in those. So you can still get quality asteroids. It's just that they only come from the initial recipe. Of course, that does have some improvements with it as well, but you cannot do the whole reprocessing thing. So space casinos are pretty much gone. But that doesn't mean you can't do quality and have some quality bits on platforms and use them to make quality ores and stuff like that. It's just that the yields, because it's the initial recipe, are way, way lower and, not as good, essentially. So while quality is not, completely gone on platforms, and quality asteroids and that are still there, the bit where you do the whole reprocessing and just get infinite asteroids and convert them between each other to balance them up and all those sort of tricks, they're basically gone. Okay. Quality trains. There is not too much to say other than quality locomotives and wagons. And these are the changes they've made. Locomotives, they accelerate with more power and have a higher top speed. Cargo wagons, they carry more item stacks, up to 100 with legendary. Fluid wagons have increased storage tank volume up to 125,000 with legendary, and the artillery wagon has an increased shooting range similar to turrets. That last one was already in the game, but I think they just wanted to list all of the types of train. So basically those are like the top numbers. I obviously can't tell you what the other ones are because it's not specifically mentioned here, but as with all quality, it goes up per level. So the second level is better, and the third one is better, and the fourth one is better. And so your top end, your legendary, is 100 stacks items, which looks nuts when you open the inventory, I must say. It's literally, it's 10 rows by 10 in a single wagon. And then 125k for the legendary tank. The trains, interestingly, have both an increase from power, which is the acceleration rate, basically, and then top speed. Yes, so your absolute top speed for your legendary locomotive is 259. Okay, this extra bit is what you're getting as your boost from your fuel. So you've still got the boost from the fuel on top. It doesn't negate that for some reason or what have you, because it's got nuclear fuel in it basically. So that's your 39 km/h boost, unless I've got that wrong, and that's also where the 900's coming from. The plus 900 there, it's coming from the actual fuel sort of thing. So you still get that bonus as well. I think that's all I can say, like, officially, because they're not putting the detail in. But obviously, it goes up, you know. So a common is slower than a legendary, and you know, as with all quality, it steps up in between. They do also, you know, they get health bonuses as well, sort of thing. The other part to it is this acceleration power. So it's not just that they have a higher top speed. The acceleration power, which is the consumption, goes up as well. Basically, they accelerate super quickly. I'll get on to the next point first, but what does this mean? Okay, what this means is that trains will enter at a higher speed. Obviously, braking force is how they slow down, and that's a separate research and what have you, but they will enter your system, your station or what have you, at a higher speed. They will cover distances much faster. They will carry more material with them. But on top of that, they will also accelerate away from your stations and from any signals and what have you much faster. So basically they are turbocharged in the sense that they will travel through your system at a lot higher speed. They will arrive at your stations with much more stuff, and they will be able to leave your stations much higher. So what does that mean? That means higher throughput of trains and more material in the trains. One of the reasons for giving this is that belts have become better than trains for like super duper mega basing and throughput and stuff, because you can stack items, you know, on turbo belts basically, so that stuff can come out of them super quickly. That stuff can travel and be moved around super quickly, and so trains were like an inferior solution. Because we've got liquid metals now, liquid iron, liquid copper, you could pipe stuff faster than train wagons would carry it. So your fluid wagons being increased in volume means that they can turn up, because if you're going with a throughput thing, you know, if it turns up and it empties the original common wagon in seconds, then you would get gaps in the flow because it squirts it all out, and the train has got to then pull away before the next one can pull in. Then it can keep flowing, whereas now it carries even more, so your next train can be waiting behind or ready to go. It empties and it pulls away quicker so that your next one can pull in and start that flow again. Okay, so the other part to this, the thing I always said was like one of the blockers for doing this was like the logic of upgrading them. Okay, so the next part addresses that. We didn't not want quality to affect the rolling stock. That means the trains that are currently running. But we had the small technical detail of how you would actually progress with using them. The main issue being, if you have a fleet of hundreds of trains, you'd have to upgrade them all by hand or such. So with some effort, time and a detailed approach, our seeding was able to make using the upgrade planner on trains work. If a train is marked for upgrade and a robot is assigned to upgrade it, the train will wait at its current stop. So this was the big question about it, was like, it's all very well, you know, you've got a train network, you've got 500 trains on it with cargo wagons, fluid wagons, locomotives. Your trains, as it shows here, you know, any old length of trains, you could have 3, 27, 9 trains for if you're a complete insane person. So you could have, it's not just trains in the sense of I've got, you know, 500 train units. There could be ridiculous numbers of wagons and actual locomotives and fluid wagons for you to upgrade. And so what, you're going to sit there, you're going to give them all some logic command that brings them all to the upgrade or something, or put in some special interrupt that says come to my upgrade station and do it by hand, because these trains are in motion even when they're only stopped when they're set on manual. When they're at a station, they're more like, it's like a runner ready to go, you know, they are about to move. So as soon as the game says okay, you can go, off they go. So if you upgrade that train via an upgrade planner, the bot could fly over with the replacement train and then it's gone. And what happens then? The bot has to follow it round. And obviously bots can get super fast, but they've just made everything super fast. with legendary trains going at 259 kilometers an hour. So yeah, so how would you do that? Would you have them all come in and just wait at a single station? If you've got hundreds of trains, that would be a nightmare. Bots could be too slow, or they could not find the right train, or they could just be flying around forever chasing this train. So instead what happens is you can just drag across the entire map with your upgrade planner if you want to. You may want to selectively upgrade. But if a train has got this I'm to be upgraded, then it will pause at whatever station it's got and enter a special parking mode where it's waiting for that bot to catch up to it and replace the train. This means once you have production of the high quality train items, you can just go crazy wild upgrading all the trains, and they should all eventually be upgraded without any schedule mishaps or manual work. So yes, so it's all via the upgrade planner basically. So they made it nice and easy for you to do. Fluid system updates by Rhaegar. The 2.0 fluid rewrite was rushed, and as such there are a few holes left in the process, which I set out to fill. One of the most obvious chasms was that pass-through ports with filters would not prevent unrelated fluids from passing through them. So here we have a couple of bizarre examples of that. So where we've got a boiler and lubricant is being pumped through the boiler. So you would expect that it should be saying, I can't take lubricant, why are you sending me lubricant? And it would reject it or disallow it, or it wouldn't even enter it, but it can, and it passes straight through. So again, feels like it's not a bug because it's working as we'll see it was intended, but the way it's intended is wrong in a sense. The second example of this is an EMP where it starts off suitably set up, and then they rotate the building and it basically connects internally and allows that same fluid that was passing through to go into it. This is obviously incorrect. The root of the issue is that pass-through ports, such as the boiler's water input, have two fluid buffers. The buffer which is a member of the pipeline and the internal buffer which the boiler uses for its operations. The internal buffer is what the water filter is set on and is what is shown in the GUI. On the other hand, the pipeline buffer has no filter set and the portion inside the boiler is entirely hidden. In other words, think of it like the pipe passes through the actual machine, that's the pipeline buffer, and then there's a separate connection which has its own buffer, which is a separate box, which is essentially drawing from that, and that's the bit that is used by the machine, so the steam in the boiler, but that bit is the only bit with a filter. So the pipe that passes through is unfiltered, even though it's got these like pictures on it saying I only accept water. It's not true. Any fluid can pass through. And that's essentially what this diagram is showing. You've got the pipe segments here, and then you've got the actual pipeline buffer, which in that example is lubricant. And so that's just able to pass through. Okay. And when it says shown in GUIs, tooltips and alt mode, the internal buffer, the bit that is almost like the tank within the machine, that is what it shows basically. So this is what it shows here, and it doesn't actually apply to the pipeline buffer. And what the machine is trying to do is trying to suck that water from this pipeline buffer. Obviously it's failing because it's got lubricant in it, but it shouldn't even have lubricant in it. That shouldn't be even possible. It then has a third buffer that is the actual process material. So when it converts water to steam, so heats it, steam conversion, that's then stored somewhere else, and that then is what transfers into the separate buffer for the next set of pipes. So effectively this is one big fluid box now, and this is one big fluid box, and it's got two fluid boxes inside it. That one tries to suck from that one tries to push to that one. And so the error essentially is that this accepts any fluid, so that's the point being made there. The solution seemed obvious. Remove the hidden double buffer and set the filter directly on the pipeline. So then, rather than have this extra buffer here that is the fluid it uses in its process and to create its output, Instead, it would say this has to be water in here and take that directly into the steam. So when you boil your water, take it directly from the pipe and use it, which is sort of what you'd mentally expect it's doing, but it wasn't. However, this introduces a rather large issue: setting a fluid filter on a pipeline. Pipelines are made of multiple fluid boxes which are added at different times, so the pipeline must keep track of the filters of member fluid boxes and set its own filter accordingly as the topology changes. Furthermore, what happens if you add a fluid box with a conflicting filter or conflicting fluid contents? The game needs to somehow reconcile them. The other point they were making there, so I sort of skipped across that point there, is that if you add filters into, if this is one pipeline, and this is it, the system is synchronizing this as one thing. If you then add something in that says I can only take water and the whole rest of the pipe is lubricant, what does that do? Because it can't fit in there, or does it reject the rest of it and disconnect? What actually happens to that? And that's the point. It has to decide. I suppose the other way I think about it is if you build this setup and then you put the wrong fluid into it, these pipes are totally fine with having lube in. Yeah, they can have any fluid in. It's this one, it's the boiler that says, no, I've got to have water in me. So do these pipes fill up with lube and this just sits here going, no, I don't accept lube? Or does the whole system not accept lube anymore? And of course, because you're having to do it like a meta controller, you're having to say for the whole system, as you disconnect and connect pipes, it's going to have to do that assessment over and over again to say, oh, a pipe's been added, what does that, is that allowed? And if it's allowed and then something changes, what happens? Introducing fluid mixing prevention. That's right, fluid mixing prevention is making a grand return. Rather than attempting to completely prevent the building of a mixed setup, the Friday Facts they refer to as 312, and that was an attempt to stop you doing any kind of mixing. You know, if it had a fluid in it, you wouldn't be able to connect to building and all that sort of stuff. People instantly found workarounds, and if I connect these up in this order, then I can mix the pipes. So it was a valiant attempt, but people, well, there were just too many edge cases and situations and what have you that it didn't end up working. This system prevents mixing in the simple case, and when mixing occurs through other means, rotation, robot construction, etc., it produces a mixing warning. The pipelines will not be merged until the mixing condition is cleared. What it's showing with the caption of a pipeline filtered to water cannot merge with a pipeline full of lubricant until the lubricant is cleared. So what this has got is an attempt by the player to put in this mixed situation which isn't allowed because this has the lube in it. However, it only stops it when they're trying to put it in by hand. If a bot does it, in order to stop weird situations where bots are just not able to do their job and what have you, it lets that be built. And of course you could rotate it like is mentioned. So, you know, there are too many edge cases as per 312 that could be exploited or cause it to break or what have you. So it's a simple check. Can I build this, you know, by hand? If it somehow happens, yeah, fluid ends up mixed or what have you, trying to go into it, then it will get this new little warning here to when the bot places it that says this connection is not valid. Okay, and until you fix that, and that's fixed in this case by rotating the pump or flipping the pump and sucking that lube out, and then this water is fine to go in. But until you do that, it'll just give you a warning. So it doesn't try and fix all of the fluid mixing problems. It just creates a warning system for when it finds a problem, basically. So if you can make a problem happen, it goes, oh, well, whatever. But that won't work. That's basically the fix. Notably, fluid mixing only occurs on bidirectional connections. You can still create smoothie pipes by connecting pumps or unidirectional machine outputs, different fluids in them, and the game will not get in your way. So if you want to do mixed pipes for whatever mad reason, then you can still do that. It's just that if the building allows pass-through, and if it allows that, then it will stop this edge case. Okay, so it will basically only block it if it's a pass-through mechanism. So your EMP with its pass-through, your boiler with its pass-through, if there's other buildings, same with them, and it only stops you there. So you can do mixed pipes, but you can't do mixed pipes where it can pass through a building because you easily end up with broken machines and what have you. With mixing prevention in place, I was able to remove the hidden double buffer, solving a lot of confusing bugs and simplifying the system architecture. Fluid flow scaling. The fluid algorithm will scale the throughput of a given connection based on the fullness ratios of the source and the sink. To facilitate this, you need some baseline number to scale, and in 2.0 this is hard-coded to 100 per tick or 6,000 per second. A tick being a in-game tick, so the game operates effectively at a 60 frames a second rate, which is where you get the 60,000, or sorry, 6,000, because 60 times 100 is 6,000. And what it's talking about the scaling thing is that there was this thing where there was like infinite throughput. So if you push something in one end, it would instantaneously, it would actually be, if you think of it, it's the fluid at the other end. But if you push water in one end of a pipe, it's available at the other end instantaneously, assuming, as I say, it's like a single pipe of water. So effectively the throughput, it's like teleporting the water effectively. So to sort of stop that, it had this ratio of source and sink. So source being the what's putting the fluid in, and the sink being where the fluid is going. And this was this thing, it said it in the Friday Facts, so you'd have to go back and read that one, where it's like the more input and output you had, the throughput would scale, so it would go up or down based on the number of connections. And it says this works fine for the vast majority of players, but when you introduce quality into the mix, you very quickly run into situations where setups need more than 6,000 per second, or more realistically 3,000 per second on average, of throughput, and things begin to break down. So this is the illustration of it. It's processing steam, so it's processing sulfuric acid with calcite to make steam, which is then being condensed into water by these machines. And what the situation is, essentially why it's breaking, is that everything is legendary. So these modules are legendary speed ones, these machines are legendary chemical plants. And the caption just says the green columns represent the fluid contents of each fluid box. Coloured indicators are from bottleneck light mod. So that's what the little dots are, basically. And you can see how these are flashing on and off. It's easier actually to compare it to the next one and more visually there. We see how this is flashing yellow and green, and this one's flashing red and green. The red means it's not working, and the green means it does. The yellow means its output is full. So it's trying to push out this fluid, and it can't quite push it out because of this ratios thing, because these are too high and effectively processing too quickly because they're all legendary to go into this machine. And this one is actually just not able to put its stuff out because, again, this ratio of this to this is such that 6,000 per second is not enough throughput. And I say it's easier if you instantly see it on here where these are all straight green. So the fix means that everything stays green, basically. This bug sat around unfixed for over a year until just recently an embarrassingly obvious and simple solution came to me in a dream. Rhaegar must have some exciting dreams. Simply derive the max flow from the fluid buffer volume and fix crafting machines to properly scale their output based on the effective recipe speed and productivity. Caption just says, it just works, TM. But you can see, I say, to some extent, if you want to understand this one properly, I think you need to go back and read the original Fluid Friday Facts, the changes to fluids. But essentially, the bug was, even though all of these machines should be able to accept the fluids that are passing through them, in reality, because they were at legendary levels, they were pausing while the fluids caught up. And so the change that's been made means that the fluids, don't need to catch up, essentially, that they can accept the right volumes based on the speed of the machines. New pipe GUI and pipe circuit connection. The pipe GUI has received an overhaul to show fluid contents in more detail and in real time. You may be able to spot a few new features as well. So, in this video, we've got a pipe to ground that's been, selected essentially. And what this is about, what this point is that pipes and pipe to grounds, therefore, can now be connected to the circuit network. And so what Raygun has also added is some more specifics around pipes. So previously it would tell you what was in the pipe, like the entire pipeline. Now it tells you what's specifically in that pipe, like a more frequent update as well. And it tells you what the temperature is, what the contents of this pipe to ground is, so this individual unit, and you can clear that, as well as the whole pipeline, and you can clear that as well. As I mentioned before, this whole thing, I think people got the impression that it was a single buffer and that was it, but it's not. It is sliced into bits. It synchronizes the volume, the amount in each pipe, because in that previous one you can actually see that there was a slight lag while it synchronized it. Anyway, that means we're going to be able to do all sorts of interesting things with pipes, or people are. There is also another tick box here, which is visualize pipeline. So that is the same visualization that you have at the moment, but you can turn it off and on basically, and it has a little info thing there. That that is visualization of pipeline, so that's not new or anything like that. So yeah, so you can sort of turn it off and all that sort of stuff. I'll be honest, when I was doing this, I mean, it's basically hinting that there's stuff in there, but I probably wouldn't figure this out because I'm not such a big circuit connection user. What's it's presenting there, I probably wouldn't even realise it was different, other than it's saying it's different. But yes, so I say, particularly if you are a circuit network user, then you might want to have a good think about what's being shown there. As always, flip your thoughts to us at the usual places. So it makes logical sense now, whereas it was just a bizarre mechanic that you just had to work with, as it were. But what this does means, obviously, you don't usually get the actual oil slots, as it were, the holes in the ground, in a nice ordered pattern like that. They're all over the place, but it does mean that you can just simply connect things up as you would expect to connect them up. You don't have to work too much with, wait, which corner is it on, and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, so it makes it all a little bit nicer, a little bit easier. This was a big thumbs up for me, because I always hated the weird orientation madness when you rotated them. And so the fact that they do exactly what you'd expect them to do, when you flip them, you rotate them, you adjust them, is big thumbs up from me. Burner mining phase of the game is not one that I particularly enjoy or try to move on as quickly as I can. So I didn't really do anything with this, because it sort of moves on so quickly that I didn't really care. I was directly inserting into furnaces, so if you flip furnaces and flip it, it's not going to matter, other than you might end up, you have to do the wrong directional flip, you might end up with no stuff going into your furnace. So the splittery thing, the flippy thing, the splittery thing, the inserter thing is a really nice addition. It's something I think a lot of people wanted and probably never thought they would get in vanilla. It is a bit sort of, if I'm totally honest, I would have preferred them to introduce a system like in that mod, where you can just set where it outputs. I kind of get why they didn't, but it is a bit sort of like, you end up to take advantage of this, you end up redesigning things basically, or not using your old approaches, which is fine, and it's always fun to come up with designs. That's the thing I enjoy the most in the game. But you do sort of end up going, ooh, I could do that parallel belt thing, maybe I'll work that into it. Obviously it's not viable everywhere, because you've only got assemblers 3x3, so you can only put so many inserters on it, type of thing. Yeah, it is a bit sort of like, ooh, I could use that there. And it is a really nice feature, particularly, as I say, in combination with the whole always putting it on the start of the splitter. And it doesn't matter on the orientation, an inserter will always put it on the start of the splitter now. So we have a situation where some settable inserters is sort of happening again, in that the whole far side rule, the whole further away on the belt, is why that output to the output. And so putting it on the inside is actually giving you that mechanic without giving you that mechanic. So it is a little bit, It's still a little bit, you have to know it, if you see what I mean. Obviously, if you put them on a belt and then into an inserter, and then into a splitter, it will still work. It's, you know, it's not going to change in there. So I'm actually gonna, I got a bigger version of this. Now, if you've watched any of my other videos, my other sort of big series, they're not big, but my other series that I do, which is the law speculation, you'll know that I've done one video on Fulgora, and I've actually written the script for a second video on Fulgora. This is exactly why I've written those scripts. I've not recorded them, and I'm doing a season 2 later on when, you know, when version 2.1 is out and the dust has settled. So I will be picking up on some of these points later, because when they do this and they stick a load of ruins in the oily ocean, that adds more questions, basically. I mean, I would make 2 comments. I don't know if the flow lines are the gas, like the, you know, the sort of dust that comes up. I'm not sure if that's what they're referring to there. I don't quite know what they mean by flow lines, if I'm honest. There is a lot more gas around them. I'm personally not as big a fan of that. It sort of hides them, and I get why, because there would be a lot of, you know, ash basically and particulate matter, and you can understand it, but it hides it a bit too much for me. I mean, I don't think it looks bad. I mean, I think it looks amazing, actually. But it's just, I would prefer a little bit less of the gas so that it's a bit sort of just easier to see. You know, like see the detail, basically. I mean, the flow lines might be more the edges. You know, it's got those going on. I've actually finished a script on the Demolisher, so I'll be speculating all about the Demolisher in an upcoming video. I do like the front, though. One of the things they have done is add a lot more stuff on the front, and it does actually feel like it's pushing along the ground now, and that is the advantage of the dust coming up. It does look like it's scraping along the surface a lot more. Here it is at the moment. It does look like it's plopped on, if you see what I mean, and as I say, you're not getting the whole really big boulders being thrown up as it moves along. There is smoke. Maybe it's, you know, my smoke reservation is to do with the fact that I quite like this level of smoke, and so it's more, seems a bit over the top. But this is the new guy. It does look much craggier, much more solid, particularly if you look at these big things here. One of the things to note about where they go from looking like, you know, fairly thin, like shell type, you know, pieces on top of each other, to actually slabs of stone that are on top. It does have the lines on them still, so I'm not sure what those are meant to in a sense represent, but maybe them rubbing on each other, maybe each bit of shell rubbing. But yeah, the back pieces now look like they're more like dinosaurs, if you see what I mean, where, you know, they're actual like big lumps of plate, rather than before they were, you know, insect style things, you know, next to each other, if you see what I mean. It does mean that you kind of lose some of the glow from some of the angles. The way it's done now, it does look like they're actually chunky and like solid, and that, you know, these things battling each other. I'll be honest, they look more like they would fit in a Godzilla movie than they did. That's kind of my overall impression with it. Yes, and I think this looks awesome. This looks way, you know, you've gone from just here's a bunch of rocks where they used to be to what looks like the corpse of an animal. These are very clever, the way, because these are agnostic. Is the point, is that they could, the Demolisher could be orientated in any way, pointing in any direction, and these, when stuck together, look right, as it were, because they're not directional. They're not pointing in a direction, but when you stick them together, it kind of looks like they are, because of the, you know, what's occluding. So what's going behind the other bits leaves it so that it does look directional. It's very clever. I also particularly like this here, because of this. It looks like it had, you know, a face. So you know, that's its proper face there. But this kind of looks like it could have been a face type of thing. But yeah, what it now looks like as well. And so it's interesting the mention of pumice and stuff. So is a Demolisher like a Is it made of like a lava that's got a lot of dissolved gases in it, and then when it dies, all of that releases and it becomes pumice-like? Or is it made from pumice rock? Is that where it gets its, some material to build? It incorporates pumice rock into maybe it's into exterior, and that's what's protecting it. Because that pumice rock idea would be quite interesting, because it's very light, as I say, but it's still quite strong, because it's rock, but it's in and maybe that's effectively what's going on with the Demolisher, that they're enormous, and these outer parts on the new design, those are solid rock, but underneath it's pumice. And so this creature on its legs is able to move itself, because what its body's made of is lighter than it looks, but it's still super tough and strong for when they're, fighting with each other. I'm giving you a lot of freebie stuff from the upcoming video, but yeah. So to me, this looks absolutely awesome. It looks like the corpse of a beast eater more than the old version. The space, I think the way this is being presented is very much we've basically killed space casinos. Still do quality in space with normal crashing, but not the whole, getting infinite legendary stuff. But to compensate that and for you to use them, the thing everyone's been asking for, quality trains, is being added to the game. So there's a bit of a carrot and a stick there, a sort of you might throw your toys out the pram now that Space Casino is gone, but do you really want to not play with quality? Because you can get quality trains. And they've given you a really nice extra thing for trains that means maybe you don't want to abandon quality in a huff because you can't use a Space Casino, basically. So although they're taking out Space Casino, they're giving you something really powerful, really fun, really interesting. Lots of people have been asking for, in order for you to encourage you to use quality. And these are relatively obvious upgrades, I suppose, but it's this type of stuff that in my video I was saying that quality doesn't have enough things, everything's just, a pipe's got more health, a wall's got more health. I mean, inserters being faster and stuff is interesting, and assembly machines, I guess. But for me, the speed thing is just, I don't really care. I'll just build more machines, All right, I get more power, but, I've got a fusion reactor. Why do I care? I suppose platforms, it makes sense there. So the odd one that you build that's extra fast, great, you put it on a platform. But again, it's designed for platforms. Trains don't even work on platforms. So this is an entirely planet-based buff, basically. And whether it makes train megabases versus belt megabases more or less viable, then other people have to work out, because that's not kind of my cup of tea. Obviously, I don't do speculation anymore because I know what's going on in the game. As I previously mentioned, I would encourage you, if circuit networks and all that sort of stuff is of interest to you, to have a good look at what's going on in this video and try and work out what the few new features as well might be. Okay, but yeah, you can now connect pipes to the circuit network, and as it shows here, you can read the content. So that is actually quite useful, basically, because you can now do stuff based on because if you remember, we have now a massive great range that pipes can operate over. So pipes, as per here, can actually contain a lot of fluid that you might want to factor into your maths. So if a tank holds, I can't remember what it holds now, is it 25k or something? That plus that is a lot. If it is 25, then that's almost 4 tanks worth of fluid in the whole pipeline. So you might be perfectly content with that as your buffer. May not want tanks. So it's going to allow people to do some interesting things, I think. So yes, so I guess to round it all off, and I think again, nobody really speculated in the comments. Do feel free to slap stuff in. I won't confirm or deny, but it's always interesting to see what you're thinking. But the thing I would say is that we're only 2 weeks into these. There's probably going to be 4 of them. They might do some over the, when it's in open beta, like talking about the detail, as it were. Talking about the more technical changes that don't really do anything. If there are any, maybe there aren't any, but I'm sure there'll be some Friday Facts, or I'll guess there'll be some Friday Facts when it's actually up and running for everybody to play with. But the thing I would say is that they've already revealed all this stuff. What else do you think is coming? What else do you think is going to get buffed or changed or deleted or nerfed or, what have you? What do you think is coming up? I would say be fascinated to know what you think, given that we've had awesome changes to platforms and their logistics and excellent changes to some of the functioning of stuff, some great improvements to graphics already, and there was one in the last one, I forgot what it is. What else do you think is coming? I hope you enjoyed today's Friday Facts video and might consider coming back for another one. If you want to chat about the Friday Facts, then you can find me live streaming Factorio over on my Twitch channel at Trismegismus every Sunday afternoon. Thanks for watching. Cheers. Corpse of a beastie when it goes on and on. That was terrible.